You think you know this rhyme, but what if it was a warning? It begins like so many childhood memories. Soft, familiar, harmless. A little rhyme we all heard growing up. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye. You probably sang it once, or heard it in the background of a cartoon. Just words, right? Something light, silly, safe. But stop for a moment. 4 and 20 blackbirds, baked into a pie? A king counting money behind closed doors? A queen with her honey and a maid who loses her nose? Who exactly thought this was child-friendly? What if it never was? What if this rhyme wasn't just a quirky tune, but something much older and much darker? What if it's not nonsense at all, but a story encoded in rhyme? A warning dressed as a lullaby? A whisper of scandal, betrayal, punishment, passed down so many times we forgot what it was warning us about. Maybe this wasn't for children at all. Maybe it was a message for adults, hidden in plain sight. Because behind the pie and the birds, the nursery tune and the dainty dish, lies something else entirely. Let's take a closer look. The strange tale, hiding in plain sight. It begins like a lullaby, soft, familiar, almost sweet. A rhyme we've heard since childhood. So well known, we stopped listening to the words. But what if we actually paid attention? Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye. Right there, already strange. Who carries a pocket full of rye? And why are they singing? Then it gets worse. 4 and 20 blackbirds, baked in a pie. That's 24 live birds, stuffed inside a pie, ready to sing the moment it's opened. And this, we're told, is a dainty dish. Akukarhas. For a king, think about it. A pie filled with birds, not food. The king is counting his money. The queen is alone, eating bread and honey. And a maid doing her chores is suddenly attacked, her nose pecked off by a bird falling from the sky. It sounds absurd, almost grotesque, but this rhyme is centuries old, and it might not be as innocent as we thought, because in the past, rhymes like this weren't just for children. They were codes, allegories, hidden messages, meant to mock kings, disguise rebellion, or preserve secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. This isn't just a nursery rhyme, it's a puzzle. And the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Clues in coins and cookbooks. Let's start with the sixpence. A small silver coin, humble, yet oddly specific. The earliest known reference dates back to the year 1551, when the sixpence was first minted under the reign of Edward VI. It was meant to simplify transactions, to slip easily into a pocket, or a rhyme. By the time Shakespeare was writing his comedies, the coin had already become part of everyday life. In Twelfth Night, Sir Toby Belch tosses sixpence to a clown in exchange for a song. A throwaway moment, maybe. Or maybe not. Because just a few years later, in 1614, another playwright mentions the phrase, "sing a song of sixpence," which tells us something important. The rhyme was already circulating, already familiar, already part of the cultural air. But while the coin is curious, it's the blackbirds, the ones baked in a pie, that really grab us by the collar. Because here's the twist. That part isn't pure fantasy, it's historical. In 1598, a cookbook was published, a real one, not satire, that includes a bizarre recipe. It describes a pie prepared with an already baked crust, and then live birds placed inside it just before serving. When the pie was brought out and ceremoniously opened, the birds would burst out, flapping their wings, flying straight into the banquet hall, a living, feathered explosion in the middle of dinner. It wasn't food, it was theater, a joke, a trick. But not the kind you'd pull at a child's birthday. This was known as a subtlety, a word that once meant something far more dramatic than it does today. Not discreet or refined, but spectacular. Something that startled, something that made guests gasp. And for royalty, that was the point. It wasn't about nourishment, it was about control, a demonstration that even nature could be baked, boxed, and unleashed on command, all for the amusement of those in power. So the next time you hear 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie, remember, it wasn't just a rhyme. It was a real performance, a royal trick, a beautiful, terrifying metaphor, hiding in plain sight. A wedding feast with wings. Let's move from England to France, to a wedding so extravagant that even the nobles, привыкшие ко всяким чудесам, were left speechless. In the year 1600, King Henry IV married Marie de Medici, and their wedding banquet wasn't just lavish. It was a spectacle engineered to impress Europe. Imagine a hall blazing with candles, gold-threaded tapestries shimmering on the walls, the finest musicians in the kingdom playing just softly enough for the clinking of goblets to be heard. Every detail was designed to say, France is powerful again. And then came the moment people still whisper about. During the feast, servants approached the tables with folded napkins. Elegant, innocent-looking. Guests lifted them, expecting the usual. Cutlery, bread, maybe a handwritten menu. Instead, the napkins burst open, releasing a flurry of wings. Live songbirds, startled by the light and music, shot into the air and filled the hall with frantic chirping. It must have looked magical, or unsettling, or both. One chronicle claims that for dessert, the couple was served milk and honey, a symbolic sweetness for the beginning of their life together. A queen eating honey, a king surrounded by signs of wealth and abundance, a spectacle involving birds erupting in the middle of a meal. Sound familiar? But the story doesn't end with theatrics. Marie de Medici was not just a blushing bride. She arrived with one of the largest dowries Europe had ever seen. The Medici family, legendary bankers, kingmakers, and financial architects of Renaissance Italy, essentially paid off France's crushing national debts as part of the marriage arrangement. So when the rhyme says, the king was in his counting house, counting out his money, it may not be a metaphor. It may be a wink, a jab, a political commentary disguised as a children's verse, mocking a king who quite literally gained his financial salvation by marrying a woman whose family bought France out of bankruptcy. And then there's the maid, the one who lost her nose. In many nursery rhymes, servants are throwaway characters, background details, decorations. But what if this one isn't? What if she represents someone real, a rival, a warning, a woman whose punishment encoded far more than a slapstick accident with a bird? Because in royal courts, losing your nose wasn't just a wound. It was a symbol, a metaphor, an accusation. And this rhyme might be doing what rhymes of its era did best, whispering the truth that couldn't be spoken aloud. A lover scorned and shamed. Before there was a queen, there was a promise. And before there was Marie de Medici, there was another woman, one who expected to wear the crown. Her name was Henriette de Balzac. Elegant, fierce, proud. She wasn't just a mistress. She was, for a time, the king's chosen one. Henri had pledged himself to her. Whispers in court said they were as good as married. And then, he didn't. Instead, he married a foreigner, a Medici. A woman whose name came with a dowry large enough to silence a kingdom's debts. And Henriette? She was cast aside, just like that. But she didn't go quietly. At court, Henriette mocked the new queen, with venom barely hidden behind smiles. She called her the banker bride, sneering at her Italian heritage, her accent, her transactional value. To Henriette, Marie wasn't a queen, she was a purchase. And then came the moment that turned whispers into legend. At an official court function, with nobles, ambassadors, and foreign dignitaries all watching, King Henri did something no one expected. He called both women forward, his past and his present. Then, with a casual cruelty that only royalty can wield, he turned to Marie and said in front of everyone, "This woman was my mistress, but now she serves you." Gasps, frozen smiles, the room holding its breath. Henri stepped toward Henriette, placed his hand on her head, and pressed it down. He made her kneel. And then, with the eyes of all of France upon her, he made her kiss the hem of the queen's gown. A gesture meant to humiliate, a performance of power. The king had made his choice, and ensured no one would question it. Henriette never recovered from that moment. Not long after, both women gave birth to sons, their deliveries only days apart. The court whispered of fate, of rivalry made flesh, 2 boys, 2 mothers, 1 throne. The bitterness didn't fade, it deepened. Henriette's fury turned quiet and dangerous. Rumors later linked her to plots against the king. She had lost his favor, lost her future, lost her public dignity. The rhyme speaks of a maid who had her nose pecked off. Henriette's nose remained intact, but her pride torn away, in front of everyone, with no feathers to blame. The pirate theory that fooled the internet. Centuries passed, monarchies fell, empires rose and crumbled. The rhyme endured, tucked inside nursery books, drifting like fog through generations. Until one day, in the neon glow dawn of the internet, someone gave it a new life, a darker life. It was the year 1999. The early web was still a place of mystery, a wilderness of static pages, blinking fonts, and strange rabbit holes. And somewhere in that strange new world, a site appeared. It called itself the Repository of Lost Legends. The kind of name that made you lean in, the kind of name that promised secrets, and it delivered. According to this version, the rhyme wasn't about kings or queens at all. It was a pirate code, a cryptic message allegedly penned by the infamous Blackbeard himself, a hidden logbook disguised as verse. In this interpretation, the Blackbirds weren't birds. They were men, Blackbeard's crew. The pie was his ship, sealed shut, loaded with danger, ready to burst open. The maid wasn't a servant. She was a merchant vessel, marked for plunder. And the bread and honey? Pirate rations, the last meal before the raid. It was clever, atmospheric, just believable enough to send shivers down the spine. And for a while, people believed it. History blogs cited it, forums debated it. Teachers repeated it in classrooms. It felt too good not to be true, but it wasn't. The site eventually came clean. The authors admitted it had all been fabricated, a hoax, intentionally planted to test how easily fake stories spread. And it worked. Even today, the pirate theory still circulates. It shows up in trivia books, in did you know listicles, in late-night YouTube rabbit holes. It's proof of something unsettling. Sometimes a false legend, if told well, survives better than the truth. Because mystery is magnetic. And even the made-up has power if it sounds just right. Printing, protest, and a pun. Not every theory points to pirates or palaces. Some lead us to printing presses, puns, and something far more subversive. In the 1500s, long before pie meant dessert, the word had a very different meaning in the world of printing. A pie referred to a chaotic heap of metal type, jumbled letters scattered out of order before a page was composed. Printers dreaded it. Compositors cursed it. It was a mess, but also a metaphor. So when we hear 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie, it might not be about birds at all. It could be about ink. About letters, about language on the verge of being unleashed. The blackbirds, dark, winged, lively, may have symbolized the printed words themselves, covered in black ink, ready to fly, and 4 and 20. That just so happens to match the number of letters in the Latin alphabet used by English printers at the time. 24 symbols, carefully arranged to bring meaning to the page. Now here's where it gets interesting. In 1539, during the reign of King Henry VIII, something monumental happened. The first official English Bible was printed. For the first time, ordinary people, not just priests or royalty, could read scripture in their own language. The printing press didn't just change how books were made. It changed who had access to power and who was allowed to speak. The king in his counting house? That could be Henry himself, counting the wealth pouring in from the dissolution of the monasteries, selling off land, melting chalices, profiting from the very church he'd broken away from. The queen in the parlor eating bread and honey? That might be Catherine of Aragon. Once beloved, now cast aside, holding on to sweetness while her world crumbled. And the maid? The one in the garden? The one who loses her nose? That might be Anne Boleyn. She began as a lady-in-waiting, a presence in the background. Then, a rival. Then, a queen. And finally, a victim. Her nose wasn't pecked off by a bird. It was something sharper, quicker, final. By that reading, the rhyme isn't just a nonsense verse. It's a quiet act of rebellion, a satirical poem written by those who couldn't speak freely. Printers, poets, political dissidents, hiding messages between the lines. It's protest disguised as play, truth hidden in rhyme. And once you start reading it that way, you never hear it the same again. A goddess, a punishment, and a severed nose. If we follow the trail even further back, past kings, past print shops, past banquets with exploding pies, we stumble into something far older, something mythic, something that doesn't feel like a children's rhyme at all. Folklorists often point to Celtic tradition, where blackbirds were not just birds. They were messengers, threshold creatures, symbols of endings and beginnings, perched exactly at the border between life and death. In some legends, they belonged to goddesses of fate, women who punished, rewarded, or warned mortals through signs only the wise could interpret. So when a blackbird appears in a rhyme, it may not simply be part of a kitchen joke. It might be a symbol, a warning, or even a curse. And then there's the line that shocks modern ears the most. The maid losing her nose. At first glance, it sounds absurd, cartoonish. But in the medieval world, it wasn't a joke at all. A severed nose was a real punishment, especially for women. In Anglo-Saxon law codes, cutting off a woman's nose was a penalty for adultery. Not whispered rumor, not poetic metaphor, an actual documented sentence. Archaeologists even uncovered a skull belonging to a young Anglo-Saxon woman, her nasal bones deliberately removed. A life marked by shame long after her death. Even scripture mentions this punishment, which tells us something important. People of the past would have recognized the image immediately. For them, a maid losing her nose wasn't surreal. It was brutal social commentary. And it gets darker. The maid is in the garden. Today that sounds innocent. Watering flowers, hanging laundry, doing chores. But in 17th century slang, the word garden didn't just mean a patch of land. It was a euphemism. A quiet, coded way to speak about a woman's body, especially the most private parts she was expected to guard, protect, and hide. Now read the line again with that knowledge in mind. The maid was in the garden, hanging out the clothes, when down came a blackbird and pecked off her nose. It suddenly shifts. No longer a silly image, no longer a nursery joke. It sounds like a warning or a judgment. A myth wrapped in a punishment, wrapped in a metaphor, a goddess, a crime, a body, a sentence. And beneath it all, a reminder that many nursery rhymes weren't made for children. They were made to preserve what couldn't be said aloud. Stories of power, betrayal, desire, and consequence. Once you know that, it becomes impossible to unhear the meaning hiding between the lines. The scandal that shocked the court. If there is one real woman whose shadow seems to fall directly across this rhyme, it's Elizabeth Chudley. The kind of court beauty whose life reads like a novel, written by someone with a taste for chaos. She wasn't just a maid of honor at Queen Charlotte's court. She was the maid of honor everyone whispered about. Tall, magnetic, clever, with a smile that could disarm a diplomat, and a temper that could start a war, Elizabeth lived in a world where one wrong glance could destroy a reputation. And yet she played with fire as if she were immune. In her 20s, she secretly married Augustus Hervey, a naval officer from a respectable family. Not a scandal, yet, but she regretted it almost immediately. They grew apart, drifted, lived separate lives. And Elizabeth, determined to carve out a future worthy of her beauty and ambition, pretended the marriage had never happened. Years passed, suitors came and went, and then she married again, this time to Evelyn Pierrepont, the Duke of Kingston, one of the richest and most influential men in England. A duke, a title, an estate, a future secured. And then the nightmare began. When the Duke died and left Elizabeth his fortune, his outraged relatives demanded an inquiry. They insisted she had been married before, and that by marrying again, she had committed bigamy. In the 18th century, that wasn't just a scandal, it was a national spectacle. Elizabeth was dragged into a public trial so sensational that newspapers sold out daily. Pamphlets mocked her. Crowds gathered just to watch her carriage pass. The press called her a schemer, a liar, even a criminal. and cartoonists sharpened their pens with glee. They drew her half naked. They drew her masked. They drew her with a severed nose, a cruel visual metaphor for shame, punishment, and moral correction, echoing grim medieval traditions that still lingered in cultural memory. Whether the rhyme's maid truly refers to Elizabeth is impossible to prove. There's no document, no author, no confession. But the parallels? They're unsettling. A maid in disgrace, public humiliation, a symbolic disfigurement used to punish a woman who stepped outside the boundaries society demanded she obey. Sometimes history doesn't give us clear answers. It gives us rhymes, and it leaves us wondering whose voice is really hidden inside them. A feathered jab at a royal poet. Not every theory behind this rhyme is dark or deadly. Some are just petty, delightfully, poetically petty. According to one theory, the entire verse may have started not as folklore, not as myth, but as a literary joke, aimed at a very specific man with a very unfortunate name, Henry James Pye. In the late 18th century, Pye was appointed Britain's poet laureate, an honor traditionally reserved for the finest literary minds in the kingdom. But Pye, he wasn't exactly Shakespeare, or even close. Critics called his verse clumsy, his metaphors forced, his rhythm offbeat. One reviewer politely called his work unmemorable. Others weren't so kind. Many believed Pye owed his appointment not to talent, but to politics. He was loyal. He was convenient. He was safe. In other words, the perfect court poet for a government that didn't want to be challenged by actual genius. And then came the rhyme. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Some literary historians believe this wasn't just a charming line about a magical pastry. It was a pun, a veiled insult, a jab aimed squarely at Pye himself. The pie wasn't food. It was Pye, the man, the poet. And the birds? Those might be the voices that finally had space to sing, once the stiff, stale crust of his poetry was cut away. According to the theory, the author of this jab may have been George Stevens, a razor-tongued literary wit and Shakespearean editor known for his cutting humor and zero tolerance for mediocrity. If Stevens was behind it, it wouldn't be the first time he embedded a personal attack in a line of verse. He was known to skewer rivals so subtly that it took years to catch the sting. And this one stuck. Because if that's true, Sing a Song of Sixpence isn't just a rhyme, it's revenge. An 18th century subtweet, baked into a children's verse, still echoing centuries later. Proof once again that history has a wicked sense of humor. And that in the right hands, even a pie can be weaponized. A rhyme in pieces, or one long mystery. Sometimes the oldest stories are the ones built in layers, line by line, image by image, mystery by mystery. And Sing a Song of Sixpence may be exactly that. Not a single story, but a patchwork. The earliest known printed version of the rhyme dates to the year 1744. But it only included the first 4 lines. The ones about singing, about sixpence, about a pocket full of rye. And of course, the birds baked into a pie. That's it. No king in his counting house, no queen with her honey, no maid in the garden, and certainly no pecked-off nose. All of that, the parts we now consider iconic, didn't show up until decades later in the 1780s. And even then, they weren't always attached. Some appeared in pamphlets, others in broadsides. Bits and fragments that drifted through oral tradition before ever landing on the printed page. So what does that mean? It means this rhyme may not have started as a rhyme at all. It may have been 3 separate tales, whispered down through generations. One about a pie that opened and sang. Another about royalty and scandal. A third about a woman punished for something no one dared name directly. Over time, they converged. Maybe by accident, maybe by design, maybe by someone clever enough to stitch together images that felt familiar, and yet, when joined, became deeply strange. Because what other nursery rhyme contains food, royalty, violence, slang, biblical allusions, and sexual euphemisms, all in just a handful of lines? It's short, it's catchy, it's everywhere. But the more we examine it, the more it resists explanation. A song, a pie, a king, a queen, a maid, a garden, a nose. Put them together, and you get a story that doesn't quite add up. Which is why, after centuries of repetition, reinterpretation, and reinvention, we're still asking, was it ever meant to make sense? Or was it always meant to conceal something? So what was it really about? Was it about a wedding feast, where birds erupted from pies in a royal hall glittering with candles and whispered alliances? Was it about a king, counting coin by coin the fortune that came not from conquest, but from a bride's dowry and a broken promise? Was it about a mistress forced to her knees, kissing the hem of the queen's gown, while the court watched in silence and satisfaction? Was it a pirate's song, disguised as a lullaby, smuggling coded orders across the sea? Was it the story of the first English Bible, a burst of printed blackbirds setting loose a revolution of ink and faith? Was it punishment, cruel, symbolic, medieval, for a woman who wandered into a garden she wasn't allowed to claim? Was it satire, a literary dagger baked into rhyme and served with a smile? Maybe it was all of these. Maybe it was none, because sometimes a rhyme is just a rhyme. And sometimes it's a map, folded, torn, passed down in whispers. What we know for certain is this: behind the sweetness of sixpence, behind the sing-song rhythm children chant without a second thought, there's weight, there's history, there are bones. Old rhymes don't survive by accident. They endure because they hide things. So the next time you hear a nursery rhyme, at bedtime, in a children's book, on a playground, pause, listen again, and ask yourself softly, what are they really singing about?